Hi, everyone. This is the Acoustic Guitar Show, and tonight we have a very, very special guest for the kind of thing we are going to do. Introduced by this. Ladies and gentlemen, Stephen Miller.
Hi there.
Or Steve Miller or Stephen Miller.
We'll use the EVN, Stephen. Yeah.
Stephen, perfect. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for being here. It's great to have you because this is mostly about fingerstyle guitar, even if we are going to get our other subjects related to. But fingerstyle guitar is the main focus of the magazine. And you are a producer and engineer, mixer, recorder, everything. I don't know. You will tell us of the record that I call The Kind of Blue of Acoustic Guitar, which is Aerial Boundaries by Michael Hedges. That record, I believe, changed everything in our instrument history. But you did a lot of things. Would you like to introduce yourself? Like, what were you doing when you were 13?
Well, when I was 13, I was playing sometimes 5 gigs a weekend, playing with my rock band and then jazz rock band. It had horns, electric violin, playing weddings, bar mitzvahs, and having older guys and my parents drive me around the New York, New Jersey area and playing, every kind of music and beyond just rock and jazz, which were my things, and blues at that time. I was also playing, and this is kind of really important I think for all musicians, playing with older musicians, 10, 20, 30 years older than me. Yeah. And on weddings and bar mitzvahs, obviously you're playing, especially in those days, 50 years ago, you were playing not just pop songs of the day, but you were playing music, what we call the Great American Songbook, the songs that Ella Fitzgerald and Frank Sinatra and Louis Armstrong and Duke Ellington did. And playing those, even though I was the young kid that the older musicians brought to play the rock tunes of the day, the Beatles tunes and Beach Boys and Creedence Clearwater.
Pop music was a serious thing at the time.
But what I did, it was a great learning ground, because while they played the old standards, this, Fly Me to the Moon, that were my parents' music of my parents, I would sit behind a curtain when I wasn't playing, and I would sit there with a bass or a guitar, or I couldn't plunk on an extra piano because it would have made noise, and learn those songs. So through those those gigs, I learned, hundreds and hundreds of songs. So years later, by the time I started working with artists like Manhattan Transfer or the jazz singer Diane Schuur, and I knew all those tunes, or certainly a huge amount of what's called the Great American Songbook, that has come back into vogue with people like Diana Krall and Michael Bublé and other people. So I was doing that, and that's what I was doing up until my early teens, or like my late teens, when I actually just put the guitar away and didn't touch one for a few years, because I knew that what I wanted to do was be a record producer and recording engineer. And I even told my junior high school guidance counselor this. And this was, let's say, 1968. And in those days, when you said a record producer, in those days, really, there were no independent record producers. They were all hired by the record companies.
Yeah.
So when the guidance counselor asked me in 1968, said, well, what's a record producer? I was a pretty honest guy, and I said, I have no idea, but I know that that's what I'm going to do.
Oh, man, this is great. You wanted to be George Martin on the other side of the ocean.
Yeah, I mean, really, there was, I mean, George Martin, and this was, you got to remember, this was late 60s. So this was before Quincy Jones. Quincy Jones at that point was still, known as an arranger. And he had produced a famous record, It's My Party and I'll Cry If I Want To by Leslie Gore. But this was pre his emergence as what we know as the great producer. So there were people like John Hammond at Columbia Records, who was really one of the people that merged eras. He worked with Count Basie, and he worked with with Bessie Smith and Duke Ellington, and he signed Bob Dylan, and he also signed Bruce Springsteen, and he signed Stevie Ray Vaughan. So there were just a few of those guys, and they were more auteurs than
He's on the back of the cover of our Stevie Ray first album. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's how I think most of us knew of who these people were. You looked at the cover, and you see these names, and the other thing that was interesting was prior to the early 70s, studio musicians were not listed on the records. So guys that played on hundreds, if not thousands of record sessions, you didn't know their names until a certain point in the 70s, when you started seeing these names. And in all the major recording areas, certainly New York, Los Angeles, and Nashville, each 10 to 15 years, you'd see the same names on every record. You go, why is that? And those were the guys that could make those records. And the same thing with London and with Paris. It was the same group of guys, and then every generation or two, it gets to be the next generation of guys. So, the
Wrecking Crew. What was their name?
Exactly, the Wrecking Crew. That played on they played on everything from Frank Sinatra to the Monkees to the Beach Boys.
Everything.
Everything. So those were the people I looked at and said, I want to be that. That the craft.
I want to ask you how you ended. If I read a proper quote, how you ended doing the artwork for a Queen record. So.
That's just a bizarre thing, and that was I gave them an idea. I met somebody that was working for them, and somehow they gave me a credit, even though I just mentioned an idea and was out to dinner with a bunch of people in London, and that one's a
kind of Andy Warhol's idea, something like that.
Yeah, kind of.
Kind of.
Yeah.
So this could go on forever, but it's not. Unfortunately, this is not the case, because we have to stay focused. Otherwise, it's too easy. Talking to someone like you. I will ask you something about Michael Hedges, of course. I will ask you something about Alex de Grassi, because you engineered or produced, or maybe all of it for The Water Garden, which is
The Water Garden,
a wonderful record.
The Water Garden is, to me, after Aerial Boundaries, to me, The Water Garden is the second greatest acoustic guitar record I know of. And not because
Me too.
I did it, but because the compositions, I mean, with all the Michael Hedges imitators that have been, or let's just call them, people that were influenced by Michael Hedges.
Yeah.
The big difference for 99% of them, and most of them over the last 37 years have sent me their music and asked if I would work on their music. The difference is that obviously there was this amazing technique that Michael developed. And so many people have, over these years developed this ridiculous technique, but that's part of it. The other part of it is the composition. You know, I mean, having technique is like being a trumpet player and being able to play high notes, and then you go, okay, now play me a solo or something, and it sucks, or it's, you know, it's rudimentary. It's great technique, but Hedges was a composer.
Composer, yeah, definitely.
And those compositions could have existed on multitude of instruments. And I've seen people play his tunes on very different instruments. And the same thing with Alex de Grassi. I just did, well, we did it a while ago, but it just came out, his newest record called The Bridge. And like The Water Garden, the compositions are just incredible, you know, and to the layman, it might just seem like, oh, a bunch of, you know, really amazing picking, you know, but the compositions are outrageous. And the other thing was that I took that, and what I said to Alex was, you know, we're going to take the next step sonically, because there was a record that we did, of his that I thought was the next step from Aerial Boundaries. What I did sonically to it, it had, I'm trying to think the name of it. It had the song Blue Trout and Deep at Night, if you know that record. And I took what I did with that record, and with The Water Garden, just took it sonically way beyond, where he had this pickup that split each string into its own channel. So I was able to pick and choose and take what I do sonically with, and expand it like, you know, we've never been able to do before. So to me, The Water Garden is like really the next step.
Yeah, definitely. One of those, yeah.
And when I was in mastering that record, Sting was in the next studio at Sterling Sound and walked in the room and said, "What is that?" You know, and I said, "Yeah, it's Alex de Grassi." You know, he said, "That's outrageous," you know, and I went, "Yeah, it kind of is."
He's such a great player. I love there is one tune that really changed my life, which is The Zipper. Which I learned. I bought, you know, the transcription. I learned all the tune, and then I used that tuning, which I borrowed from him, and for writing music, you know, a lot. It's a wonderful tuning. But that record has an amazing sound. We have to go a little deeper into those two, because I'm sure you have pretty interesting and useful informations. Should we start from the Aerial Boundaries thing?
Sure.
So because people have to remember how long ago it took place. I mean, it's not just to say, you know, that the time has passed, but that didn't exist before. That record is something there is before that and after that.
Yeah.
So I think he had a sound already developed, but I believe you were a big part of how it was captured. Could you share what happened in the studio, the main things that allowed you to put that sound on record?
Well, you know, and this is a good lesson for people that are recording at home, which is at this point 99%. That record was not. I don't know if you've ever seen the pictures of the recording session. If not, I'll send some to you. That was not done in a recording studio. That was done in a country inn, and we backed up, brought a mobile recording truck to this was in a country inn, and Michael was set up in the living room. Around plants and things, and I was in recording truck, and the table had been set a little bit because there was a record in 1982 called An Evening at Windham Hill Live, and which had a lot of the Windham Hill artists, and we had a concert at the Berkeley Performance Center in Boston, Massachusetts. And it was George Winston, it was Will Ackerman, Alex Grassi, Liz Story. And I recorded that with a mobile truck. And then I mixed that. And that was the first time anyone got to hear the song Rickover's Dream. And when I was mixing that, I had already done George Winston's December record, which obviously is the Kind of Blue and the Sgt. Pepper of instrumental records. It's the biggest selling solo instrumental record of all time. And the Liz Story record, and I had started putting my sonic imprint on these pieces. And my sonic imprint came from a number of areas. I love the sound of ECM records, the two great engineers from ECM records, so the Chick Corea and Keith Jarrett records, and especially the Ralph Towner records. And I love that. I also loved sonic experiments like the Harold Budd and Eno records that was out at that point. And I wanted to take this image that sounded beautiful, let's say on the Keith Jarrett records, and take that times 10. That was a very natural sound and beautiful. The reverb tails were gorgeous, but I wanted to take that and take that into hyperspace. I had always dreamed of this sound that was like you were in the clouds, and it was infinity. And I don't know how else to explain it other than I had this image of taking something bigger than life. And in the past, that was frowned upon in instrumental music, certainly in jazz and folk and folkloric recordings. You know, for years, a jazz record or folkloric record wanted to seem very natural and unadorned.
And you just stuck a microphone and that was it.
And certain records like Kind of Blue, you know, which had, you know, a certain reverb that was from Columbia Records Studio in New York, started to change that a little bit. So I just had this image. And again, what made what I did and do very different, because a lot of engineers ask about this, and they think it's just about what's your reverb settings. And it's not about that. I listen to the piece of music and I create things within the timing of the piece, the tempo of the piece. So sometimes I go against that. So, you know, if you were to think, a lot of people think, oh, well, if you use a delay and reverb, you have to time it to the exact tempo of the piece. Well, think of when you hear something in a hall. Sometimes, most times, like 99% of the times, if you're listening to an orchestra in a hall or a solo instrumental, the timing of the piece is not timed to the length of the hall. So it's not giving you a reverb and a reflection back that's perfectly in time with the music.
Yeah, sure.
And so if you listen to classical records and you hear, wow, you know, the hall is beautiful, but it's not exactly giving the reflections back in time, but that also plays sometimes exactly with the music and creates more tension and does other beautiful things to the instruments. So my concept was to use certain reverbs. And at the time, the Lexicon 224 was very new in 1978. And as it turned out, I was one of the first users of it, but I never read the user's manual. So I used it almost exactly the opposite of the way if you read the user's manual that they told you to do that. And later, when they found that out at Lexicon, they had me program my kind of settings in their next unit because it was so different. But then I did something very unique, which was taking delays, different delays, and putting them into the reverb, not dry delays, but delays from, and again, from the different sides of the, if you're doing a piano, you would say the left hand and the right hand, and with the microphones, the left and the right microphone. And I would send delays from those into the opposite sides of the reverb units at very different delay times, just things that were creating motion. And then I would actually EQ those very differently. So you started hearing things. Most people thought there was like 5 or 6 different reverbs on it, when in fact there was only one reverb, but I was treating the reverb with different delays that were EQ'd and filtered very differently. So you have things jumping out and at different time bases. And when I really took that to the greatest extent was the tune Aerial Boundaries. Now, Michael, I don't know if you ever read after Michael died, there was a story that Alex de Grassi put together for Acoustic Guitar magazine. And if not, I'll send that to you. But what happened was Michael was in the living room of this inn. And I told him, don't wear headphones. I want you to just play the guitar. I don't want you to be thinking about it in the headphones. And I created all the stuff on Aerial Boundaries, except 1-2 tunes are live to 2-track. Most people say, oh, well, would you mix it differently? I go, there was no mixing. I was doing all that live. I was manipulating that while he was playing the guitar. So when he did a run through or two, I kind of got the idea of what I was going to do and I was changing things in the middle of the piece.
And you print that.
That was printed. I could have screwed that up.
You couldn't do anything after.
No, you couldn't do anything afterwards. In fact, when the 25th anniversary of that record, Sony wanted to do a reissue, and they called me and said,
There's no reissue.
Can you remix it like special, like surround sound mixes? And I said, that would be kind of bullshit because there's no mixing. And the A&R person, who was a nice young woman, said, that's not possible. I said, why is that not possible? She said, I went to recording school. You couldn't have done that live. And I went, I'm sorry, but that's, you're a little young. You don't understand. Yeah, that's what I did. There was not, and I still don't know. I doubt that I would have been able to do the same thing if I mixed it, because I'd be overthinking it. And at the same time, I could have screwed it up royally. So what happened was that Michael had no idea that I was doing what I was doing. He came into the truck and he flipped out. I mean, he was so angry. He was screaming, "You screwed up my music." And this was in Vermont. He ran out of the truck, and Michael used to smoke big joints. He grabbed a huge joint and he went into the woods, and we didn't see him for a few hours. He came back in and he said, "All right, play that back for me." And I played back which was like the 4th take. And again, if I was doing that again today, there are edits I would make. That was completely unedited. He made, on that take, there's a few boo-boos, but I didn't want to edit it, especially because if I edited it from a point where there was a really long reverb tail onto something else, it would have sucked. So he's started listening, and he's continuing to smoke a huge joint. And after about the 5th listen, he looked at me and went, that is the wildest thing I have ever heard in my life. And I said, yeah.
And it was pretty wild.
And I said, yeah, it is. And he just said, okay, that's just insane. And at that point, we, you know, as you know, each tune on that record sounds very different, because that was my concept on almost all those instrumental records, whether it's Alex de Grassi, Liz Story, you know, Will Ackerman. I looked at, from a production standpoint, that when you, again, listen to an old jazz record or a folk record, every tune was the same. It's sonically. And I think that modern rock and pop music and modern production, you hear these amazing, you know, even then, 40 years ago, you listen everything from a Beatles record to a, you know, any, you know, modern pop record, sounds changed, and sonically they were very, you know, it was very interesting to go from tune to tune and have very different vibe of let's even just say a very wet tune to a very dry tune. You know, there's so many variations, and so to me, I listened to each song and I went, here's the vibe that I feel like is enhances that and supports that song the best. And so each thing, you know, like the on that song, I think it's called IBM Selectric, da 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 da, that sounded like an IBM Selectric typewriter. That had
hot type, yeah,
hot type, and that had to be pretty dry, because anytime you put more length on it, it smeared what he was doing. So I just filled in the cracks, and you know, it sounds pretty dry, but there's enhancement there, and that's how I looked at each of those pieces. Each one had its own vibe. Ben Susan had something where the ambience was not as high end. I pulled the high end of the ambience, and you hear more delay through that in certain low mid-range areas. So it, you know, again, it's not, I never looked at those things technically. And that's why engineers who ask me technically, how do you do that? I go, you listen to the music, and as a musician, I'm adding, you know, Gavin Lurson, who's one of the best mastering engineers in the world, and who's also a guitarist who was influenced by Hedges, said to me, you're duetting with the music. And
yeah, because engineers usually have their performance, but it's after. But
yeah.
You played your performance together with Michael. That's amazing.
And then, you know, I did that, you know, mixing stuff as I did for Degrassi. You know, like so I you're going to hear my phone talking. Hopefully it won't be a crazy message just left. But no matter whether I'm mixing after the fact or mixing live to 2-track, you know, as those things go down, I'm duetting. I'm not looking at, I'm looking at things from a musical standpoint, and what am I doing to support and enhance the music. And there's no question that you know, when Pete Townsend and Steve Vai and guys heard Aerial Boundaries, you know, they're hearing and the music, but they're also, you know, Steve has said to me, you know, like, wow, that, you know, that what you did had only been done with electric guitars. You know, it was just astounding to hear those kind of things with acoustic, you know.
Definitely. Oh, I wonder what happened if Michael didn't meet you, but this didn't happen, so we'll never know. Were you aware of at the time that record was so important?
You know, important. You never know how people are going to take it, but
so good.
But the fact is that Yes, I mean, when we finished the recordings of in Vermont, which would, I guess, comprise 6 of the songs, Will Ackerman was building a place in Vermont, and we went to his little the garage that he had finished, and we sat there and we played a cassette on a little boombox, and we were drinking wine, and Michael was smoking a joint too, and we knew. I mean, I knew that the song "Aerial Boundaries" was, why I went so far with it, because I knew that it was something that was brand new, that no one had ever heard. That Rick Over's Dream was, which he had written before that, was getting there. It was, and one of the reasons why I took Aerial Boundaries so far was that we were actually frustrated that the Rick Over's Dream on Aerial Boundaries, I don't think is as good as the live version on the on the Windham Hill live records, and it just it wasn't quite there, but we knew that those pieces, and then the other ones that we did with the backwards tape, with where all the guitars are backwards, which we record on a 4-track. People said, "Well, did you have like a 30-track machine?" I go, "No, we did just like the Beatles did Sgt. Pepper. We did it on a 4-track machine." And
what did you capture? 2 microphones and his pickups inside the guitar. 2 pickups
on Aerial Boundaries, on those solo pieces, was 3 microphones and then 2 pickups. He had the Sunrise, which was and the Frap, and it's so funny because the Sunrise pickup, which everyone was using at the time because that was kind of it. And so Grassi and Ackerman and other people were using it. I thought it was a dreadful sounding piece of crap. It just was efficient, and it did the job, but it was so mid-rangey and just kind of awful. So
the combination is great.
Well, when you combine it the way I did, where you don't use any direct signal of that pickup, the pickup actually goes into a flanger or a chorus, and then that goes into reverb, or I would
fill it.
Yeah, well, on
stage he used the TC.
On Aerial Boundaries, that was one of the bummers, that he had one of the first TCs that we used on that live record. But Michael was kind of a vagabond, and he had a bunch of his stuff in a locker at the bus station in Boston, and somebody broke into it and stole his TC. So when he got to Vermont for us to record, I said, "Where's that amazing TC unit?" He goes, "It was stolen," and I had to get, just like at that point, a Boss. So and then I also was creating a tape flange that I used that was kind of a chorus in the truck. So I had to improvise because I was wanting that amazing sounding TC unit, but it was stolen, so we didn't have it.
So you had the magnetic, the Sunrise into this Boss pedal or whatever effect.
Yeah, well, yeah, I split it. So I took a split of that, one into the Boss and one just into the console, and then the Frap into the console. 2 microphones. Again, I'll send you pictures. And then
definitely, thank you.
And one was like about, I don't know, like a few feet away, like maybe 1.5 feet away. So if one was maybe this far away.
Yeah, your arm.
Yeah, and the other was close. And again, part of my whole thing is, and what I want to get, I've always tried to get across to people recording guitar, acoustic guitar, especially fingerstyle, because it's a whole different thing other, than strumming as far as what you can do with the image. I mean, when you look at a guitar and you say, okay, I want to take, if you can record a guitar stereo, there's so many different ways you can approach that. You can say, here you are sitting, and I'm just going to take two microphones and put them, let's say, one near the body of the guitar, one lower, and one near the hole, or one near the neck. Or you can take them a stereo microphone and just put it somewhere in front. That's one way of looking at the image. You can say that's a real image. You would say that's a realistic stereo image of what's going on in the room. The same way, with a piano, you can take it and say, okay, that's what's going on in the room. Or you can start moving things closer and saying, okay, now what I did with the Windham Hill records was, okay, it's not, my left-right image is not just, let's say, the neck and the body. My left-right image, I'm taking the microphones, instead of doing this, I'm turning them around and then putting them in front of the strings, and you're getting a discrete or somewhat discrete image of the low strings and the high strings. So suddenly what is horizontal, suddenly I turn that around and you're hearing that vertical. You're hearing, so when you go, you're hearing across the spectrum. That's what I did. And then I mixed that with other things. And that again was I wasn't the first to do that for sure, but I was the first to take that and then create a whole orchestral concept behind that. So that's one part of the image. I mean, and everyone who's recording guitar and wanting to have a sound, I mean, right off the bat, how much wood to strings? What do you want? What do you want it to be like? If you want more wood, then you're going to pull it from the strings, or maybe you want it closer where you have the image, one of the microphones closer to the wood,
to the body.
The body, and one maybe still on the body but closer to the bottom of the neck. And on top of that, then you say, how far away do you want the image? One of the worst things that people do, it's different if you're recording just solo. You decide on basically where you want the listener to feel like they are, how far away you want the listener to feel like they are.
Yeah.
If you're recording acoustic guitar and going to put it in a track, which I think the majority of stuff really is.
Of course.
The mistake that most people make is they go, well, I'm just getting it close, get a sound that I like, and then I'll put it in the mix. Let's say they're putting it in a mix with electric guitars and keyboards. The thing to do is think about, and you have to think about this beforehand. This is the problem with Pro Tools. People have too many options. Why with Aerial Boundaries, it's like, no, it's the record. If I fucked it up, I fucked it up and we have to do it again. But you have to think about it beforehand. Think where it sits, where you want it to sit in the depth of the stereo plane, not just left and right where you want it to sit. Yeah. Everything has depth. So if you record the guitar really close and you actually want that guitar to be sitting in between a bunch of electrics, so it's, think of the greatest electric rock records that have acoustic, like Zeppelin records and like Jethro Tull records, where you're listening to the acoustic in context of electrics. And I'm, I never asked Jimmy Page, but I know from the people that made those records, it's like, yeah, he thought about, okay, here's where the acoustic is going to sit with the electrics. So we have to pull the mics a certain length back so it sits there naturally. You can fake it with some ambience, but it's never going to be like the way it is. So you have to think about the depth, where it's going to sit in the depth of the field, and where it's going to sit left and right. And that's hugely important. And do you want more wood? Or do you want more string? Or do you want a combination? So that informs you at least where to start with your miking. If you know, I want it a few feet back, it's going to sit with some guitars. I'm going to do a pop song where I've got it dual mono acoustic guitars on both sides, kind of like a U2 thing. Okay, I'm going to put it maybe a foot back, maybe a foot and a half back, and how much string you want opposed to wood. So you have to think about it beforehand.
Oh, this is amazing. I wouldn't imagine if we could have pictures for the magazine. That would be great. Which microphones did you use?
Well, again, I would use way better microphones than I end up doing. I used what was there. I think 4 very common AKG 452 microphones close, a U87, very common Norman mic. Those were the microphones. I mean, as I've got to work in better studios and own great microphones, there are certain microphones that I could tell you are my favorites, but I would say that maybe 99.9% of the people that will ever get to record guitar will ever be able to touch those microphones.
Yeah. This is something I will ask you at the very end if you want to give a couple of tips, suggestions about microphones or whatever, things that people can really have. But is there something that's your favorite for recording acoustic guitar, or every time is different?
Every time is different. But if I had to say, the best microphones, again, for recording close, the way I've done it, even if it's not that close, the microphone called the KM54, that is a Neumann, and that is basically the tube father of a very popular microphone called the KM84. Now, and there are different modern versions of the KI84, but the KM84 is still something that even, I won't say budget studios, but not top flight studios will have those. And KM84s, are also, great microphones by themselves. I mean, I've done a lot of stuff with those, but the KM54s are probably the best sounding. And then there's some other Neumann ones, and then Shep's CMC microphones, which are not tube microphones, are probably the cleanest non-tubes. And there are other ones that people will see, DPA microphones that are super clean, but they sound a little cold. The Shep's microphones are musical. They're I don't know, warmer, but they're super musical. And so and those both are small diaphragm. And another thing that I'm going to mention is that's confusing for most people is the concept of patterns for the microphones. And they see that you've got cardioid, and you've got omni. And realistically, if you're just overdubbing with you yourself or playing solo, that doesn't, you can get closer with omni microphones than you can with cardioid microphones. Cardioid microphones have something that's called it's this thing that the closer you get to the sound source, the more low end. The low end proximity effect,
which you don't have with Omni, right?
do not have that with Omni. So now, when
I'm learning a lot talking to you guys.
so if you want to, like, you can actually get closer without any low end buildup with Omnis. Now, I kept, let's say, the small diaphragm mics that I used, I kept in cardioid, and I would actually roll off a bit of the the bottom, because I could also get that way a more coherent stereo image that with Omni you have bleed from one to the other. So it sounded great, but you didn't have that kind of clarity of like the low to the high strings going across the stereo plane. You can still do it, but it's, again, another one of the issues to think about, because, you know, cardioid microphones became popular, more popular when you had rock recording and you're trying to separate things. So you have to get the microphones, you know, closer in and get less leakage. So if you're recording just by yourself, you kind of don't need it, you know. And sometimes even if I record a bunch of instruments, I'll in the same room, I'll even use you know, Omni mics, just because it just sounds clearer for some reason.
Yeah, amazing. Is there some kind of preamps, or are you a fan of EQ and compression going in while recording?
It's very funny. I've just pulled out some of my equalizers, and I'm selling a bunch of gear, of high-end preamps and equalizers. You know, I used to EQ more to tape live than these days. Very little. The mic preamps are, you know, again, it's what's available to you. I mean, I have some units that are, you know, just incredible, but again, they're meaningless to 99% of all people, because you would never get a chance to work with them. So it's it's to say that Mastering Lab mic preamps, there are only probably 40 of them in the world, and I have an Avalon unit sitting on the floor that is probably the greatest Class A unit I've ever seen. But there are less than 30 of them in existence. You know, so I think,
but it's great to know what you use. And
yeah, but you know, again, when people listen to Aerial Boundaries, I keep on harping on, not only was it not in a recording studio, I stupidly, in the recording truck, there were API preamps and EQs that I didn't use. I used the board, which was a Trident Series 80, which was a kind of a cheap recording console at the time. And I used the preamps and the EQ on the board, which it's just kind of like, it was almost a semi-pro console. But I just thought, oh, it's easier than taking these preamps and patching them across. I just thought, there'll be less problems if I just use what's on the console. So it really, it's been said a million times, and I don't know if any of the other guys have said this. It's not the gear.
Yeah, of course.
It's not the gear.
It's never the gear.
You know, and I laugh when, you know, in you know, these days, more people have recording gear than ever before, because everything's being done at home. You know, and people will overpay for things that they think, you know, are the best toys, and it's like, nah, you know, it's you do fine. You know, I could go in there with the cheapest preamp and Shure 57 microphones and make it sound really good, because it's the equipment. Yeah, you want it to be as good as you can, but It's not. It's not.
You know what? Everyone is mentioning Shure SM57 at a certain point. This is wonderful.
Well, because everyone you can afford. Everyone can afford an SM57. It's the most common microphone. So, yeah, you know, it really has nothing to do with it. It's where you place it and where before you even place a microphone. It's like think about what it is that you want. You know what you want to portray. What that recording wants to portray. You know, and then you go from there. You know.
This is incredible. What did you use on the Water Garden? Do you remember something?
Well, I do. The Water Garden specifically was that amazing setup was KM54 Neumann's into Mastering Lab preamps, and that is
two
yeah.
KM54.
And I set that up, and then Alex went to town, you know, and then I left, and he recorded for a week, and then I came back and mixed it, and it went. The interesting thing was, again, thinking about back to you know, like the gear, we recorded that on ADATs.
Yeah.
You know, and it was the microphones, and then he had this. I don't know who built him that pickup, but a pickup that each string had its own output.
Oh.
So there were 2 microphones and 6 outputs.
Wow. What did you do with them?
And it enabled me to do, you know, certain things, you know, really tweak it in certain ways. And so that, yeah, I mean, that would be, you know, if you had those microphones and that preamp, that would be the first thing I would grab. But again, I don't know if I've ever had that combo for another guitar record. So
amazing. That record is very mid-rangey to me, in a good sense. I mean, I was talking about this with one of the other great engineers I'm talking to in these days, and you know, guitar is a mid-range instrument basically. We have a low end, we have a high end, but it's all in the middle.
Well,
so
it's funny because, in fact, I think it's on the floor here. Hold on one second. Give me 1 second. A lot of the sound of that record comes from, this is one of the most expensive.
George Massenburg?
The George Massenburg compressor limiter. And it's very
multi-band compressor.
No, it's not. No, there's no multi-band because people really screw the stuff up with multi-band because very few people understand what that is, and they end up really screwing it up. It's just and it's funny that this is the most confusing compressor there is. In fact, George Massenburg won his Grammy for a record that he did that he, in fact, overused and overcompressed the vocals with this unit. And on the Water Garden, there are 3 pieces where, and I used the compressor in a multitude of ways. I tried it as on the entire bus. Sometimes I did it just on the guitar mics, and then sometimes I did it on the guitar pickups on the effects, and on some of them, I after the, you know, even after the fact, I went, shit, I overcompressed that, and that adds to the mid-range thing of that record. But also, a lot of people went, wow, that's got, never heard anything quite like that, and a lot of it has to do with kind of overcompressing with that GML compressor, but it gets something, again, where the ring and the sustain, has a certain quality
Yeah.
that you think more of for electric guitar. That
Yeah, definitely. It's an amazing sound. It's a very unusual sound, even if it's so natural. This is what really amazed me when I listened to that, because it was like, this is an acoustic guitar, but this is not an acoustic guitar.
well, yeah,
What's going on?
yeah. I mean, it's probably the least acoustic. I mean, the zipper, is just that. I don't even know. I think I maybe added a little bit of something to it, but that's and there's another piece on that record. I think is the zipper is the first piece.
I don't think I think it's the second, but
Yeah,
I don't want to say things.
yeah, and then the fourth piece is another one where it's pretty acoustic sounding. And then when the other pieces that are like the sixth and the eighth cut, are just out in outer space, and then you hear the delays at the end, and it's from that point on, Alex has been wanting to make more and more acoustic sounding records. So his newest record, The Bridge, is way more acoustic. I mean, it's more natural sounding, and I put some of there's little touches of that kind of stuff, my kind of stuff on it. But the Water Garden really took it out as probably as far as you could go, because the part of it is the blend of the mics and the pickups. So when you hear the highly compressed chorus and then flange, where you're not hearing a whole lot of attack from it, and then I start melding that with the microphones. So at that point, you're hearing less and less attack from the actual strings. And that's why some of them was like, wow, it's hard, you'd be hard pressed to know it was really, a Loudon or a real acoustic guitar.
Yeah, it's amazing. But of course, this was your job wasn't during the performance. It was everything was after.
Yeah, I mean, I recorded. I set up the microphones so the recording, so we would get a great recording. And then once Alex was finished doing all the recording, then I came back and started balancing it and adding everything together.
Yeah. Great. This is amazing. So our time is pretty much over. I could keep you here the whole day because this is amazing. I want a Stephen Miller #2 interview.
Well, we can do it, because again, there's so many other issues, and it's funny, one of the other things that's hugely important is how to do that when it's a singer guitar player.
If you allow me to, I will stop here if you promise to be here a second time to talk about the rest. That would be an incredible gift. Otherwise, we can go on, and I will let you say whatever, because this is amazing.
Look, if I think probably we could do it, another day. I mean, because
a smaller thing, more focused on the technical aspects.
And again, how to record it. Like when you listen to a James Taylor record or, a Lyle Lovett record, and you go, wow, the guitars sound great, or a Jack Johnson record. A friend of mine, Robert Carranza, a beautiful job of recording guitar and vocal performance live. Like that's a whole other thing, how you get that together, because you go, all right, if you use the same techniques that let's say I use for recording the guitar, and then put a microphone for the, in front of the singer, suddenly your image changes dramatically, and you got to go, oh, well, how do you balance that? And you know, that's a whole other thing. And I remember I worked with Dave Matthews on on a record, and I recorded some stuff, just him and vocal, you know, and tried different things, you know. And again, you have to think, how do you want that image? Is this the vocal more important or in front? Do you want both to be seem like the same level? Sometimes you want the guitar to seem more bigger than the vocal. You know, there's lots of things at play. So we could talk about that and other technical.
This would be amazing. This has been amazing. You are the man. I mean, I knew this was going to be great, but I didn't imagine it was going to be so good, because, you know, all the hidden things. I want to thank you so much for doing this. I will really take advantage of your presence another time, maybe in a shorter time, because I think you have a life other than the acoustic guitar show. But thank you so much.
Well, these days, you know, especially here in Los Angeles, in California, we're still on a pretty heavy lockdown. So
I read about that. Yeah.
And in fact, I belong to a wine group, and of other producers and engineers and studio owners, and later today we'll be meeting via Zoom or something like this to to be drinking our wine and toasting each other, you know, virtually. So yeah, we have a life, but not, you know, most of it's still in our homes.
We had a life.
Yeah.
This has been great. I'm really looking for Stephen Miller Part 2. This was Stephen Miller Part 1, and we just discovered that. So I will end the broadcast, and I will say goodbye in private.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Stephen Miller, for doing this. This has been great. Goodbye.